Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome into another edition of the Go 24/7 podcast. Fresh off a sweep of the Astros against the Braves, and I very well deserve that. And if you're like, what are you guys talking about? That's a good time to sign up for Go 24/7. Get in on the VIP boards and make sure to join the fun conversation. We got myself, Bryce Kuhn, Glenn West, Dylan Sanders. Coming off the spring game, Glenn and Dylan were in attendance, which I think Dylan shot this in our group text. Probably the best weather that you're going to see. I don't know, Dylan. I've never lived in Louisiana. I'm moving down there, but from what I could tell, both of you guys were enjoying what was like 77, 78, little to no humidity out there. So a good environment, good atmosphere for the spring game.
There was no point where I was miserable from one extreme or the other. So that's all you can really hope for.
That's all. That's all you can hope for. Well, it was a spring game that I was watching from home, and the broadcasters, Mike Morgan and Aaron Murray, were talking about it, and they were pleased with the format. And Glenn, I know that was one thing that we had kind of wondered, what is this going to look like? Wanted to kind of get your, we'll say the 30,000-foot view here on this. For all the talk about, is the offensive line going to be healthy enough to really put together a quality spring game? I walked away from it feeling like, hey, that was as best competition as you could have put out there. What were your thoughts on kind of the format of the spring game, and what do you think the guys really got out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably about what we'd expected going in. We weren't going to get a true purple versus gold game just because they didn't have enough numbers to really make two teams a viable option. So, they started out with some special teams work, some red zone work. They did a little bit of warming up to start off, and I mean, it was good to see kind of a few situational things. They did a couple red zone series there with both Daniels and Nussmeier in the game. Where I think I think the offense was able to score touchdowns on at least two or three of those kind of red zone opportunities. So, it was a really productive kind of format. I think, once you got into the scrimmage, those guys were pretty warmed up and had the juices flowing a little bit. And so you certainly got that from from the very first play with the Kyron Lacy 70-yard catch and run. That's just kind of the stuff that I think was missing from this offense last year at times. They didn't have a ton of explosive, plays, and that kind of, I think, ignited what was to come for the offense, especially the first team offense, whether it was Jaden Daniels or Garrett Nussmeier in there. Both very efficient days for the two quarterbacks. I think if you leave that scrimmage, you're looking at, okay, LSU's got two dudes here that could certainly contribute and make LSU a very much a competitor in the SEC next year. I think probably the one takeaway that I had that maybe not is great for LSU is the secondary looks like it's just going to take some time. Defensive backs were missing tackles, blowing assignments. That was kind of something that was a theme a couple of years ago in the final years of at Orgeron, and it seemed to really be kind of fixed last year. I think in large part because you had so many veteran players who had experience in playing in the college level, and they were able to pick things up pretty quickly. But this is a really young DB room as a whole. I mean, you've got Greg Brooks and Major Burns back there at safety, who are a few veteran guys, but this is still a really young room that doesn't have a ton of experience yet. It's going to take some time for those guys to gel, and it was one of the things we talked about last week heading into the game is what that was going to look like in the secondary, how those guys were going to be able to hold up against Malik Neighbors, against Brian Thomas, against Kyron Lacy, and those weapons had their day. I think they did a really nice job offensively of moving the ball down the field. Kind of what I expected coming in was the first team offense was going to dominate. Special teams wasn't great. They missed a couple field goal kicks, and certainly Brian Kelly talked after the game about how that position is still wide open here as who wants to win that job between Damian Ramos and Nathan Dybert. That's going to be something that carries well into the fall. And so those are probably just a few quick snap judgment takeaways that I had. We can dive into a little bit more, but I think overall it was a great format, and they were able to get enough out of it to where you could certainly see why this offense is going to be so heralded come fall.
Yeah, and let's talk about the secondary because I think that's the part where we talked, and I can't remember who mentioned it last week, but it's going to be it was going to be a vanilla look necessarily. They're not going to put everything out on tape defensively. So I wanted to pose this to you guys, and Dylan, we'll start with you on this. The secondary, should we be super concerned? Is this a case of just young guys trying to get in some more, playing time and young guys, I should say, and guys that are more new to the program? I know that was the case last year. Or is it the fact that they just were running some vanilla looks and the offense was being a little bit more creative and you can only do so much? I mean, Dylan, what would you say? Is it on the concern meter, 1 of 10? Where do you sit with the secondary here on the Monday after the spring game?
I'm sitting flat at a 5. I think 5 out of 10 in terms of. I mean, maybe that's even a little too high. I mean, listen, you have 7 of 8 corners on the scholarship corners are brand new to the team. The secondary has to learn how to play with each other. That communication is really important in the secondary. And you've mentioned it; they were running some vanilla stuff. So, but you can't. You also still need to learn how to communicate with each other in the middle of a game, in the middle of game situations. That's a huge part of it. So it's kind of like building a rapport with each other, learning the defense. Everyone's still doing it at the same time. They're all really young, not a ton of experience. So that's where a little bit of the concern like creeps in. I mean, they haven't really done it before, so how do we know that they're going to be able to get ready? But also they're young, so they have a lot of time, and they have a lot of time to get ready and tighten up. And players like Denver Harris had some highlights. Zy Alexander had some highlights. LaTerrence Welsh, I think, was the most consistent in the quarterback room. If anything, it's a little bit more concerning about the safety room because that was where they really had some lapses. I mean, both have started off with 70-yard catches that were mainly done after the catch. So whenever you had that, you definitely had a breakdown in the second level. Some guys in the wrong spots, and then Landon Ivietta was just faster than everybody and kind of just outran them, which is still a little bit of an issue. Like they weren't in position to be able to stop the deep threat, But overall, I think it's more so of a case than of them being new and them being young than they're bad players. So that's not where my worry is. I'm not worried that LSU went out and got a bunch of players who won't be able to play in the SEC this year. It's just getting them ready to play. And this is the team that this is kind of the core that you're going to see for the next 2 and 3 years. So getting them ready now, this is Brian Kelly's plan of building out a young group of cornerbacks and then growing them over time. So this is the earliest stage of that. There's going to be some growing pains.
Yeah. Glenn, obviously tackling is one of those things. It doesn't matter if you're new or not. You have to be sound on tackling, and that's something that has to be fixed. But kind of where do you sit on the panic meter if we had to rate there? I mean, I know Dylan kind of went in depth there with it, but where do you kind of sit, and what are your takeaways a little more in depth on that situation?
Yeah, not very high, probably like a 3 or 4. I mean, it was one of those things where LSU was subbing in a lot of guys too. I mean, they were mixing and matching players throughout the entire game, trying to really pick and see who kind of plays well off of one another. That's going to be something that'll probably take well into the offseason, well into the fall to figure out. And so I'm not overly concerned. I do think some of the tackling issues are a little bit concerning, just because that's an element of the game that really doesn't take a lot of like connective cohesion. You're either a good tackler, you're not a good tackler, and we've seen it from Greg Brooks. He whiffed on one, and I'm not really concerned about that as much. But certainly, you want to see those guys start to gel a little bit further together as the offseason progresses, and I think they will. And Coach Kelly said after the game that it wasn't a situation where they don't have guys they don't feel can play at this level. It's more about getting them to that level together and being able to to really play off of one another and make this a pretty lethal defense, because they do have talented players, and they do have guys that I think can help contribute and make plays, and be a positive effect for for their defense moving forward.
I mean,
Let's
yeah,
move. Go ahead.
Brian Kelly said it best, where he mentioned, I think first, whenever he was talking about getting him ready, it was in terms of the weight room, and getting guys bulked up, and the strength and conditioning staff has done really good with a lot of players on this team. So having them progress until the fall camp, I think you'll see some transformations as well.
Yeah, that would be huge. As we move up to the front seven, let's take a look. I mean, obviously, a lot of the conversation surrounded with Harold Perkins, and we're excited to see number 4. And look, I mean, the kid's going to be good. I don't think that's breaking news to anybody. This kid's going to be really good. But I know I put in kind of one of my game balls and wanted to get your takes on this, guys. But kind of the rotation at the jack position of the defensive line. Braden Swinson, he looked the part a couple of times. The pressure that a lot of these guys, OVO, I'm going to call him OVO, but Jackson Howard was a guy that really surprised me in the physical attributes that he brings to the table as an 18, 19-year-old. I mean, this kid looks the part of an SEC player. So I want to get your thoughts, and Glenn, we'll start with you on this. I mean, that was one of the biggest positional concerns coming into this season. And I think if you're an LSU fan, at least from my perspective, you can say, hey, I left saying, while we may not know a ton, we feel like we got a couple viable options in that room that can rotate and provide a pretty good impact.
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought Agofu was really solid from that jack spot. Braden Swinson's probably a little bit more athletic than I thought, kind of heading into this spring. And but yeah, I mean, I was right there with you with Jackson Howard. I thought he was really, really solid. He's a really legit 6'5", 6'6", kind of edge rusher, who I think is really gonna be a big presence for LSU next year. He's somebody that took advantage of kind of being a little bit, I guess, lacking in depth on the D line this spring, and he was the guy that I think Brian Kelly even pointed out last week before we even got to the spring game that he probably wouldn't have had these opportunities if LSU was at full strength. And so it's good to see that young freshmen like that are taking advantage of those opportunities and kind of making good first impressions on the coaching staff. And because that's when everybody's together next fall, those are the guys that the coaching staff will remember. Those are the guys that will have those first reps and see if they can't build off of what they started here in the spring. But I think that there were a number of guys that stood out. Obviously, Harold and his defensive pressure is going to be really important for this team. Liked how they utilized him. He's going to be coming at you from all angles, and that's going to be kind of the next step of evolution for him. I really thought Quincy Wiggins had a nice day. He's going to play on that edge spot with Jones, with Savion Jones, and a couple other guys once healthy, and I think that's going to be real important to get him involved this year, because he was the number 1 player in Louisiana last year. Was a little bit banged up during his true freshman year. Didn't have a whole lot of on-field opportunities, but every time we asked about him last fall, Coach Kelly and players and coaches alike all said that he was making massive improvements as the season went along. And so to see him kind of capitalize as well was really positive to see. Fitzgerald West on the interior was a guy that stood out with the second team. I don't know what to expect, honestly, because we don't have Mason Smith or Mekhi Wingo. We had a couple of guys on our board that were a little bit hesitant to say that they think that maybe the run game will be not as great this year. And then I was kind of quick to point out that you don't have Mason Smith or Mekhi Wingo in there yet. So let's pump the brakes on that until we get to see them out there in full action. So until this D-line gets at full strength, it's going to be hard to make any kind of sweeping declarations about this group. But I think the fact that you were able to get some of those guys lower on the depth chart, a real solid look in the spring, and certainly in the spring game, was a real benefit for LSU.
Yeah, you want to see him take advantage of the opportunity rather than have the lack of depth and have nobody really stepping up. So that's huge. Dylan, more specifically on Harold Perkins, I mean, look, Glenn said he's coming at you from tons of different angles. I mean, if the rest of this defense can step up, and this is a little forward thinking, obviously, but the rest of the defense, even, Braden Swinson, Jackson Howard, any of these guys produce from that jack position, and then you're starting to move around Harold Perkins on, let's just say, a 3rd and long. I mean, it has this potential set up to be a nightmare for an opposing offense. And so, I mean, how excited should fans be to see the utilization of Harold Perkins this year and the jump he can make from year 1 to year 2, which is, with how great of a freshman year he had, that's kind of scary to think about.
I think the scariest thing from the spring game was that Harold Perkins, while maintaining his freak speed, looked 10 times stronger in terms of disengaging from blockers. I mean, he destroyed Trey Holly. I mean, poor freshman. Welcome to the team, kid. He got destroyed on a play that ended Harold Perkins with a half sack. But it wasn't even just him. It was disengaging from offensive linemen. Like, he just looks stronger. And you can tell he's been in the weight room. You can tell he's been working. But he also moves like the Flash. It's seriously one of the craziest and most intimidating physical people I've ever seen. It's fun. It's just so much fun to watch. And then while, I don't think any of these players are going to, be to the level of maybe BJ Ojolari last year, this front seven has a potential to be better than a group that was, the highlight of the defense a lot of the time last season. Just in terms of depth, it seems like they have more guys to go this year than last year. I mean, they're able to move some defensive linemen to offensive line, so they just have a lot of players. And we need to mention, like Paris Shand ended up with a sack. So some of the new interior defensive linemen looked good, and
Princeton
then whenever
Malbrew is a guy that's
Princeton Malbrew. Yeah. And then you're missing still guys like Mason Smith and Greg Penn wasn't able to play. So whenever you add in those guys, it's going to be even crazier. Like this could be a really, really, really good front seven. One of the better in the SEC. Yeah. Deshaun Womack. Like, you've got a lot of potential, and you've got a lot of really good young guys, like you mentioned, Jackson Howard, to where, kind of similar to the secondary, they're planting the seed in terms of building out the depth in the future. So it's really encouraging to see the young guys already start to, show some potential. Because we're kind of seeing the vision of Brian Kelly's future LSU team already, while still looking like a team that's ready to compete this season.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I think, like what you said too, collectively this unit has the potential to be even better, and obviously Harold Perkins is going to be a big part of that. Let's
Harold
go.
Perkins is going to be one of the best players in the
be
country. It's insane.
Yeah, no breaking news there. Let's switch over to the offensive side of the football, where a poor choice of words on my part in the article, saying both quarterbacks had their moments, and I meant that as they both flashed, really well, and I think they played solid. Garrett Nussmeier and Jane Daniels. Look, Ricky Collins, Glenn, I thought it was interesting that they took the red jersey or the whatever color jersey off and said, hey, you're going to take some licks, kid. And I think that was interesting because you don't see a lot of teams do that, but there's no better welcome to the SEC, no better welcome to LSU and saying, hey, we're going to let you get hit in the spring game. But for Garrett Nussmeier and Jane Daniels, I mean, look, they both showed, I think, the creativity that you wanted to see in certain things. Yeah, there's still some things they want to continue to work on. But, Glenn, where do you sit on this? And be more careful than I was with my choice of words in this analysis.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think both were really good, and I kind of prefaced this in our opening kind of remarks there that I think if you walked out of that game or if you watched it and you kind of sat back and thought about it for maybe 2 seconds, you'd realize that LSU's got just two really good options at quarterback. Yeah. I mean, guys that you think are going to be able to not only help you compete in this conference, but win this conference again, and win the SEC West again. And I mean, look, I think, look, the biggest thing here is how do you integrate Nussmeier into this offense a little bit more? Um, I don't know the answer to that question. I think he's a guy that needs to have the ball in his hands this year a little bit more. I think what he brings to this offense is really, really good, and his ability to throw guys open. I mean, you saw it on the big play to Brian Thomas, hits him in
Mm-hmm.
stride, a 50-yard pass that just right on the numbers, and Thomas was able to come down with the catch. I'm not saying Jaden Daniels can't do that. I think he's shown that he can, and that he will take some more of those shots. But I do want to see Nussmeier out there again in the fall, getting serious first team reps. I mean, he's going to be the future of this program for sure after Daniels leaves this year. And he's a guy that I think a lot of people are excited to see get more opportunities this fall because of how he finished last year. And I still don't think, I mean, Kelly kind of walked it back immediately after the bowl game earlier this year, but I don't think it was a coincidence that Nussmeier got as many reps as he did in that game. That was a strategized plan to see what they had in both of those guys playing in the same game, in those high leverage moments in the first half. And yeah, they both responded. Jaden had some really good drives in the first half in that game. Nussmeier did too, and you see that carry on here into the spring. It doesn't matter if it's Daniels behind center or Nussmeier behind center. Both of those guys moved the offense really well. I thought Jaden, from his perspective, was a lot more aggressive in taking those shots. They took a couple of them down the field. He connected on a few. He missed, I think, one or two as well. But the fact that they're imprinting that onto his brain and that he seems to be taking that and really running with it, I think is extremely important here for LSU heading into the summer months, where they can now really dive into just how they want to operate and how they can continue building chemistry with Malik Neighbors, with Brian Thomas, with obviously with Kyron Lacey in the game that he had. Just a really important kind of day for those guys, and I think that you're able to spread it out. Chris Hilton's another guy that they got vertically involved as well. They're going to have a lot of options available to them next year, and the fact that you're seeing Jaden comfortable enough taking those shots, and that he's been really, I mean, he was really efficient, 10 of 11 for 168 yards, is no joke. I mean, that was a really solid day for him, and I think if you're an LSU fan walking out of that game, you're feeling real confident about your quarterback situation next year.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. And I want to say, too, I think there's a lot of programs that would kill to be in the situation that LSU is in. To have two guys, like you said, Glenn, that are more than capable, it feels like, of leading this team to the top of the SEC West and a trip back to Atlanta and, whatever happens from there. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how Nussmeier is worked into the offense because – Glenn, I wasn't around last year. I don't know what Nussmeier looked like last spring, but I think it's one of those things, and it's safe to say, that is this kid's taking a step to where he could start. Like if Jaden Daniels wasn't here, there'd be no hesitation in him being the number one guy. And so that'll be something kind of interesting to monitor, throughout the summer into fall camp when these guys come back together and what these guys look like. Last question we're going to pose here, and I'll give you one position each on this. Obviously, the transfer portal is open back on April 15th. Guys can enter, already some moves made across the country. But with LSU concluding the spring game, Dylan, we'll go to you first on this. What is one position that maybe you want to see LSU just take a look at, where they could maybe add some talent on the roster?
I mean, I feel like the most obvious one is kicker. Just neither of the guys instill a ton of confidence. And that can be worked on, but I mean, it's still going back. I mean, this is year 2 now of not whenever you see one of those guys walk up, like you're just not like, oh well, yeah, they'll make this. You're like, even on an extra point, you're like, oh well, at this, you can't go to the bathroom during an extra point with the guy who's with the guys who's on roster now. So I mean, maybe continuing to look there if there's any names that maybe are a little bit intriguing. It's one of the positions that where you can continue to add super late and still add like contenders. But maybe something a little bit more interesting, just adding depth to the offensive line if there's any other guys available there. I mean, that's still something that's very obviously needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Glenn, for you, I mean, what's a position maybe that you think that they look at, or I'm sure they already have a big board of some guys that are in the portal right now. Where do you think that they look as this portal window gets to the end of closing?
It's interesting you mentioned kicker, Dylan. I hadn't really thought of that one. I just don't know if there are a lot of two, kind of position battle options there where there's two really good options and one guy might enter the portal at this latest stage. But that's one to certainly consider because I'm right there with you. I don't think that Ramos or Dybert has done much to really instill a lot of confidence. I mean, they were very hesitant last year with Ramos in there on what they were willing to let him do as a place kicker. So that could certainly be an option. I lean more towards safety. I think that's probably a guy, if a veteran guy that can come in and maybe help you with some depth, be able to rotate in a little bit. If you can find a guy who's played a little bit in college to help back up Greg Brooks and Major Burns, I think that's probably where I'm leaning towards just because, I mean, Major's had some really bad injury luck ever since he got here, and it's really kind of carried over throughout his entire college career. And, look, Javian Toviano, I thought he looked solid. I thought he looked good. He very well might be ready to step into a starting role at safety. But if you have another guy in there who's played a little bit in college, has some experience, I think you feel a lot more comfortable with your situation heading into the fall if you're able to go in and get a guy like that. I would also add running back in there just because I don't think we know what John Emery's situation will end up being. I think it's just kind of been the same old with that and whole thing. And you just don't know if you're going to be able to count on him being there in the fall. And so, Armani Goodwin's a guy who has injury history. Noah Cain has injury history from Penn State. Josh Williams is coming off an injury. So, I mean, if you lose even one or two of those guys, you're looking at, Trey Holly and Caleb Jackson's also coming off an injury. So, yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of guys there that have been banged up and have injury histories that are not all that great. And so I know you look at it from, a bird's eye view and you say, oh, they got 6 guys in there. That's going to be really good for them to be able to rotate in. But it's also one that has a lot of injuries with it as well. And so if you lose a couple of those guys, you're going to be in a really tough spot in the fall. And one of the points that Brian Kelly made that I thought was really more potent after the game is that he's going into the season knowing that they're going to lose a couple key guys at certain positions. Like that's just kind of the nature of college football these days. Guys get hurt. You're not able to get them back. It's where those injuries occur and, how significant of time they missed is kind of what sometimes dictates the season and dictates you from, losing one game or 2 games or 3 games or winning them all. So it's going to be interesting that LSU finds the right depth pieces in the portal here in the second transfer window. And no doubt they're already looking at some guys. We don't have a list or any names yet, but I'm sure those will start to surface here in the next several days, weeks, and see just kind of what kind of ends up happening there.
It's going to be interesting to see this next portal opening. Obviously, teams kind of finishing up a lot of spring games this past Saturday alongside LSU, and then obviously the week before spring ball continues to conclude, and teams look to kind of fill out the roster because I like what you said, Glenn. You don't know when these injuries are going to occur, but you're bound to have a couple that you can't get back, and the timing and the severity of those could pay dividends. You want to try to kind of backload your roster right now and provide quality depth. Well, hey, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Go 24/7 podcast. Spring football coverage was a blast, and we're going to continue to cover baseball, which we got to get a baseball pod here soon because a big-time Sunday win against Ole Miss. That was a lot of fun to watch. And the Rebels go down to the Tigers. LSU's just cruising along, Glenn. I mean, it kind of feels like one of these teams that, you just want to peak at the right time. And we're going to talk about that, obviously, maybe in the next week or so. But LSU baseball is really fun to watch. And I would say the hottest ticket in town right now if you're in Baton Rouge for sure. So continuing to talk about that as we get closer to Hoover and then we get closer to what is hopefully a trip to Omaha for LSU baseball. This has been the Go 24/7 podcast, joined by Dylan Sanders, Glenn West. My name is Bryce Kuhn. We thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit us up on social media. You see all of our Twitter there. And Go 24/7. Make sure to subscribe. Get on the boards for some fun conversation. And you can make fun of me for saying that the Braves were going to sweep the Astros, and the Astros dispatched of Atlanta on their way back home. We'll see you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.